In this program, we interview Nora Gedgaudas. She's the widely recognised expert on the paleo diet, author of Primal Body Primal Mind, and now her latest book, Primal Fat Burner. That'll teach you how to live longer, slow aging, and superpower your brain. This is one of those interviews you just don't want to miss.
Good morning, Nora, and welcome back to the Carb Paleo show.
Thank you. It's so great to be back here. You guys are great.
Good morning, Mark. How are you today?
Wonderful, thank you. All the better for seeing Nora for the second time.
Of course, Mark's wonderful.
Well,
literally and figuratively, yes. As are you, Alain.
You can come back for the third time, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay, so thank you for visiting us again. And a short recap. Last show, you told us about your previous book, Primal Body Primal Mind. Mm-hmm. And today we'll talk about your latest book, Primal Fat Burner. Mm-hmm. Since I know you're always excited about your subject, can you give us, not you, no, of course not. Can you give us a quick refresher about you and who you are, what you do, and then we'll talk about the book.
Well, I've spent, the last 20 years basically working in a clinical capacity, doing a couple of different things, working with people's brains, doing a fairly sophisticated form of brain training called neurofeedback. And but in tandem with that, I've also done quite a bit of nutritional consultation and nutritional therapy along the way. And as time has gone on, that has increasingly dominated my clientele. So the interests of my clientele. I write, within the genre of diet and health from an evolutionary perspective. Some call it paleo diet. But, of course, the subtitle of my first book was Beyond the Paleo Diet for Total Health and a Longer Life, because even early on, when I started writing about this in 2009, I recognized the limitations of paleo insofar as just because our ancestors did something, is that reason enough for us to do the exact same thing now? And how would we know? And I used human longevity research as a litmus for that, as a way of basically, weighing out these foundational principles. I mean, we have to start with what our ancestors did, because, those selective pressures that, what we have mostly eaten for the last, 2-3 million years of the whole evolutionary process, in addition to the selective pressures that we face, would have completely shaped our physiological makeup and our nutritional requirements. It's the only sane starting place, and it's an essential starting place, but it doesn't really give us the whole picture. We ate a wide variety of things. Was everything we consumed equally beneficial for us? There's no foundational basis for that assumption. And so to really kind of get down to what represents an optimized foundational human diet, I looked at the longevity research and realized that, you look at some basic things like, human physiology, and you realize that there really is no established dietary requirement for carbohydrates. Very good reasons for that. Which should tell us everything we need to know about the importance of carbohydrates in our diet, really from any source, although, again, I modify things also based on the world that we live in today. And so I think fibrous vegetables and greens, for instance, even though they're not technically essential, I think are more important for us today than they ever used to be. Not everybody tolerates them. Not everybody, wants or likes to eat them, and I guess that's okay. But they do provide a plethora of phytonutrients and antioxidants, and they provide bulk, which can make, and variety that can make your meals more interesting. It makes it a little easier not to overeat things, and it's also it tends to be fairly detoxifying. So okay, but what longevity research seemed to point out was that the two factors that seem to have the biggest role in aging are the amount of insulin that we produce over the course of our lives. And again, blood sugar, I mean, insulin is not a blood sugar hormone per se. It takes excess nutrients and then moves them into storage, for later. And it's all about the coordination of our energy stores with reproduction and lifespan. So minimizing our requirement for insulin gives us a huge leap forward in terms of minimizing the diseases of the Western world and the diseases of aging and, the degenerative process that occurs with aging. And sugar by itself, we know, is also inherently damaging and inflammatory and rather destabilizing also neurologically, which I've seen firsthand in my clients that I did the brain training with. But also, it's excess protein. Also, it turns out, is a factor here. And our ancestors did eat an awful lot of it because for right up until about 10,000 years ago, we had at least 120 more species of massive animals on Earth that we hunted regularly, the Pleistocene megafauna. Some of these things, 10,000 kilograms. I mean, you take down a big, fat, sassy, woolly mammoth, you've got a family barbecue that's going to last a good week or two. And when you live in the wild, everything's feast or famine. And so when we had the meat, we feasted upon it because we didn't know we were going to be able to, bring another one of those big bad boys down, soon enough. So we feasted when we could, and that's a survival thing. But today we need to be interested in more than just basic survival, getting enough calories to get through a day. We need to be focused on the quality of our diet, which is one of the things my new book focuses on quite a bit. That's one thing that distinguishes it in part from all the eat fat to burn fat books out there and all that kind of thing. But food quality has to be a fundamental consideration. And I mean, everything we consume should be, truly organic, non-pesticided, non-GMO, non-adulterated in any way, shape, or form if we can avoid it. And then all the meat we consume should come exclusively from 100% pasture-fed and finished animals, allowed to forage on whatever's natural for them to forage upon, because the fate of our health and possibly even our species really depends on that. But 97% of what's sold comes out of feedlots and factory farms and, biosludge growing fields and, whatever else. And we are, I think we're at a critical kind of tipping point, if you will, where it could go either way. There's an awakening, I think, there's an increased awareness now that is heartening to me, that people recognize that the food supply is majorly problematic. The environment is majorly problematic. The so-called healthcare system, read disease management system, which has nothing whatever to do with health. Health is not a medical condition that can be treated with, pharmaceuticals, much to the chagrin of the industry. The number one cause of bankruptcy in this country right now is a bad diagnosis. So and the healthcare system, so-called, is collapsing. So it's really up to us to take control of our own health. I think, and I hope, your listeners are certainly likely to be savvy enough to recognize the fact that if you want to have a marketplace with friendlier options, it's up to us to demand that. That quality food and environment, where it's not going to come from laws that are passed from on high to protect us. The laws aren't designed to protect the consumer anymore. The laws are increasingly designed to protect multinational interests and give them whatever out that they need or want to avoid either telling us what's in our food or being truthful about what's in our food.
Indeed, yeah.
So it's up to us. It's got to be a grassroots thing, if you'll excuse the sort of pun. We have to demand what it is we want, and we need to vote with our dollars, which is the only form of voting that really has any power anymore to do anything.
It's the only one that large companies understand anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's so, I encourage people when they go to the stores. I haven't even really gotten to the premise of my book yet, but okay. In a roundabout way. But I encourage people when they go to stores to purchase things, to purchase their food. Number one, please be uncompromising. Please read labels, and also please ask questions, and also be willing to find people in charge and say, for instance, if there's canola oil in the deli, which there always is,
Yeah.
in at least the major chain markets, that you're not going to eat there because of that. That you need to know that because this, this trash oil, this toxic oil, which doubles as a pesticide, by the way.
Right.
I just wrote an article about that on my blog, or it was a real kind of quick summary article, really. But it's actually the primary ingredient in a lot of so-called, environmentally friendly, whatever. But with all of the same warnings on the label as conventional pesticides. Don't come into contact with them, don't consume it. If you do, call poison control. And it's just soybean oil and canola oil. Both are used actually as a pesticide.
Even Whole Foods is using canola oil.
Oh, they do, and it's even on their roasted chicken.
Yeah.
They smear it on. It's like, wow, really? I mean, other stores roast their chickens and don't necessarily use that. It's incomprehensible to me. And they need to be held accountable for that. And the organic stuff is not necessarily any better for you. The expeller pressed, whatever. Canola oil is notoriously low in vitamin E and increases your requirements for vitamin E, depletes your body of vitamin E. And, the studies around canola oil show that even since it's been kind of, I don't want to say genetically modified, but anyway, altered in order to eliminate erucic acid, which was thought to be the culprit in causing heart lesions. Turns out the stuff still causes heart lesions, and it probably has to do with the impact that it has in your body on vitamin E stores. Right. So anyway, so we have to be willing to ask for what we want, demand what we want, and it doesn't always have to be negative. I've frequently gone to people, running various markets and things like that and said, wow, I am thrilled that you are carrying this now. And I want you to know that I plan to let a lot of people I know that you're carrying this, and encourage them to shop here because of it. They need to understand that there are, positive, not just negative consequences for carrying the bad stuff, but positive consequences for carrying, the good stuff.
Right.
And same thing in restaurants. It's because people spoke up and asked a lot of questions and demanded things that we now have gluten-free menus and things like that, which is, I suppose, a little shuffle in the right direction. It's, you can have an all organic, gluten-free, non-GMO, whatever brownie mix, and it's still crap. It's just junk food. Right. So a lot of these terms, we also have to be vigilant about the terms that are thrown at us. They can tell you something is grass-fed because all cows are grass-fed for a portion of their lives.
At some point, yeah.
Right. They spend some part of their lives on pasture, so technically they can. And the teeth have been taken out of that whole grass-fed thing now, so it's increasingly vague, and they can get away with increasingly vague, representations of what that actually means and how they can present it. So you really have to grill them and say, was this animal 100% grass-fed and finished? Did it spend its life on nothing but pasture? Hopefully they're honest enough to tell you the truth. But that's the other thing, getting to know where your food actually comes from, meeting the local ranchers that are raising their animals, where you can go out and meet them and see the animals and look in their eyes and see how they're being treated and how they're being fed, and doing business directly. It's cheaper, and you have better assurance of what you're getting. Same thing with the vegetables and greens that you buy.
Last year, I was lucky to go visit the White Oak Farm in Georgia, which we interviewed on the show, and it was amazing. It was just everything he claims is true. Is the cows are grazing on pasture and they've been rotating, and then all the chicken are free range. All the animals, the only animals that are in fences are the wild pigs, because they are pigs from Spain that they brought in for, ham.
Those rowdy pigs from Spain.
Oh yeah, terrible.
And it was amazing to watch how he operates and how well he's doing. But his complaint was that it's very hard to work with large distribution companies because they want to squeeze the price constantly, and they don't respect the fact that there's a lot more work involved in growing a naturally grass-fed, pastured beef than it does in a feedlot.
Yeah, yeah. So, it's so incredibly important that we financially reward the farmers and the companies. Usually it's small companies, sometimes bigger companies, that are working really hard to do the right thing. They're really trying to do the right thing, and it's important, even if their product costs a little more, that we reward that with our food dollars, and not just go for what's cheap, because in the end those chickens come home to roost right on your head.
Right there.
Not in a good way.
I absolutely agree with you. We, the customers, have to make the change that the government or the companies, corporations are not willing to do. We have to force their hand by changing the buying patterns. And this is a crusade Mark and I have been on for a long time now. We're trying to educate people, to let them know you have the power to change things. And you can do it by choosing the right food, the right kind of food for you and your family and your health. It's more important to me to pay a little more for good quality food that's going to keep me healthy than pay a lot of money later on to doctors and hospitals and being miserable, being sick, being miserable. To me, it's just common sense, right?
Right. Well, and the news is actually pretty good, at least when it comes to my approach to doing things, because it's, the myth that's out there that I can get pretty worked up about. It really ticks me off, and it's one of my missions is to really dispel this myth, that the idea that in order to eat well you have to be wealthy. It's not true. And I have a really good friend who is probably the most budget conscious person I've ever met in my life. She's actually an awful lot of fun to be around, which you wouldn't necessarily think, people like that. But for her, it's kind of like a game to see how inexpensively she can live every month. And so she's not opposed to spending money, just opposed to wasting it. And so she, years ago, I think even before I met her, she had subscribed to a publication that was called the Tightwad Gazette. And in it, it's like how to make the most of every dollar that you make kind of thing. And she just loved to play around with that and figure out. So this is a person that knows down to the last penny what she spends on everything every month, including food. And she used to be vegetarian, isn't anymore, I guess, in part because of the influence of my earlier book. But anyway, she came to visit a few summers ago, and needless to say, we ate in a lot, and we would sit around the kitchen table talking, and she kind of got to telling me how, this is actually the least expensive way I've ever found to eat optimally well. I'm like, really? Tell me more about that. I was a little surprised, because I expect, that if you're buying fully organic, fully grass-fed, whatever, that you're paying higher prices. So even I was sort of bought into that myth a little bit. And she started talking about it and going on, and she was really excited and whatever else. And I found myself sinking down to one knee and clasping my hands and saying, will you please write a book? And will you please call it Primal Fat Burner, or excuse me, Primal Tightwad. And she laughed and she said, okay. And so she did. And apart from just a lot of just the brilliant ways in which she just helps people rethink the way they go out and buy food, really good food. I mean, we're talking about not cutting corners, not compromising anything. She created, she did a little experiment where she took a week's worth of menu from the standard American diet, right? The way of eating, everybody thinks that's all I can afford. I'm sorry, I can't afford to eat organically. I'm feeding all these kids, whatever. So she took a week's worth of menu for a single person that was quite realistic. She actually worked in grocery store chains and things conventional and saw exactly what people were buying. And and most of her family kind of eats regularly, and calculated down to the last penny what that costed for an entire week. A tablespoon of ketchup, 1 penny, whatever. And then she took a week's worth of menu from the way of eating I talk about, and she calculated that down to the last penny. And at the end of each week, tallied up the total of whatever. And I was prepared to hear that, yeah, it's more expensive, but but there is that long-term healthcare consideration. You're going to save money in the long run. Well, not only was it less expensive to eat the way I'm talking about, it actually worked out to be about $1,500 per person per year less expensive.
Okay.
Good.
And because now she's eliminated eggs from her diet, so she thought, well, I better kind of redo it just in case people can't eat eggs or whatever. It still worked out to be close to that. It was like astonishingly inexpensive by comparison. And then of course you factor in the long-term healthcare costs and everything associated with that conventional way of eating, and you really got something. Now, part of the reason for this is the fact that you're not, number one, a carbohydrate diet keeps you perpetually hungry. You are far more likely to eat more and eat relatively constantly. You're going to eat every few hours, or there's, for a lot of people, if not most people, there's a problem. But also, carbohydrate diets involve lots of processed crap that you're buying, and sodas and juices and and conventional milk and all that kind of stuff, which I talk about dairy in this book in a way that a lot of people aren't going to like. But so I mean, you're saving money on a lot of things that people go through a lot of every month. And then I also talk about the moderation of protein intake.
Yes.
Not eating, like a big slab of meat on your plate. And a lot of people don't feel like they've been fed unless there's a big slab of meat on their plates. We don't need more than 6 or 7 ounces of complete, animal source protein a day to meet our fundamental protein requirements. And it actually turns out, relative to that longevity research thing, that is a very important consideration in the scheme of things, that through moderating protein, we meet and not exceed our protein requirements. What that in turn gives us is it flips a little bit of a switch. When we let's just say when we consume protein in excess of what we need, there is a switch that is flipped that turns on a certain metabolic pathway. The researchers call it mTOR, mammalian target rapamycin, and what it is basically a protein sensor, and it's a reproductive pathway. And when it sees more nutrients coming in than are necessary, it says, "Oh, what a great time to reproduce! Let's do that." Well, if you are in fact interested in genuinely reproducing, you want to get pregnant, or you are pregnant, or you're baby, child, or teen that is growing, and you need to make new cells, then that fine, but and even necessary. But say you're not necessarily that interested in procreating right now, and you are somebody of middle age or whatever that's lived a few decades exposed to the things we get exposed to in our environment, which is extremely compromising, and you have damaged cells and damaged DNA and everything else, and then you do something that stimulates cellular proliferation. What we're talking about is a vector for cancer as well as premature aging. So by meeting those requirements and not exceeding them, instead what happens is, your body comes along and says, oh, okay, apparently not enough nutrients around to, well, I like to put it in modern day economic terms because people get that. It's too expensive to build a new house right now, so let's just fix up the one we've got. Yeah. And what that amounts to is fixing you, is taking and repairing old damaged cells instead of putting all your energy into making a bunch of new ones that you don't need. And so that's literally anti-aging.
I have a question about this, this lower cost. Now, you may or may not know, I have written the book, Healthy French Cooking for Less Than $10 a Day.
Wonderful.
the problem with that is, and this is the least, the lowest selling book of my 7 books. So, and I keep on wondering why, because in Europe it'd be a success. The problem
I
is,
would love to read it, actually.
right?
That sounds wonderful.
I'll send you
We
a
need to
copy.
swap books.
I would love it.
Yeah.
Our books will pass each other. Yeah.
But I finally came to the realization is that the biggest block for Americans is that you're required to cook from scratch. So is that the case with your friend, as she cooks everything, she doesn't buy?
Yeah, but there's so much that you can do that, like using slow cookers, or or making big pots of soup, or stews and things like that, where you can just you create one meal and it can feed you for the whole week. And rather inexpensively.
Yeah.
So that's
I do a Sunday roast in the slow cooker, strangely enough.
Yeah, there you go. And then that roast feeds you for a good long while. I made a pastured chicken for dinner last night. That's going to last all week.
Yeah. I did lamb on Sunday, for instance, and we still had a slice of lamb today for lunch.
Right.
Lovely.
Exactly.
Right.
So
you just add some organic vegetables to that, and that's a whole meal right there.
Yeah, look, I get very uninterested in. I think I'm a fairly good cook, but I'm not necessarily that crazy about spending time in the kitchen. If I have friends coming over and I really want to pamper them, which it's just in my nature. I'm a caretaker. I just want to take care of everybody. Then I can create a really nice spread, and I'll go out of my way to whatever. But if it's just like me, or me and one other person, it's like, if it takes me more than 10 minutes, I'm not interested. Let's, what's easy and simple here. And that's one of the things that I did in my new book, Primal Fat Burner. Yes, that's right. I wrote a new book. Is my publisher basically. My publisher actually, kind of put a gun to my head, so to speak, and just said, you have got to create a meal plan here. You've got to create recipes and whatever. It's like, I didn't want to go there. Because number one, I don't generally use recipes. When I grab, a handful of this and a pinch of that, and I don't know, this looks good, and I'll add some of this kind of seasoning today, and I don't know how much I just put on there. And so I attempted to kind of piece together some of my recipes, and my publisher, and then it would be at the end, well, this will serve 2 to 4, this one might serve 4 to 6, or whatever. And my publisher is like, no, what we really need from you is to have these things standardized. So I had to bring in professional chefs to help me kind of standardize it all and vet it all, and that's like, but in the end, I've got something that there are a lot of really awesome recipes, and a lot of them extremely easy to prepare. And again, how much it's going to cost you to prepare them, in part depends on how you go about buying, the ingredients for it. And if you're shopping at Whole Paycheck or something, then, hey, you've got me. You're gonna blow your paycheck every time you walk in to buy toilet paper. But there are lots of other ways of going about these things, and I frankly don't shop these chain markets very often at all. Only usually just like when I travel, I come to an unfamiliar city, or or like I go to Austin or something.
Strange place.
Yeah, it is an odd place. Yes, filled with odd people, but but we love that because it's Portland's sister city, and we have the same bumper sticker: "Keep Portland, keep Austin weird."
Yeah, that's it.
And we do.
That's why I live here.
Yeah, me too. That's why I live where I live. I live in Valhalla, really. Relative to, you cannot swing a dead cat around here without hitting, farmers and ranchers and whatever, working really hard to do the right things, and, fully grass-fed this and, whatever, and massive farmers markets that take up multiple city blocks, and where you have just every choice under the sun, and probably the majority of them trying to do the right things. And a lot of the restaurants are on board here too. So for me, it's admittedly easier than it probably is for most people elsewhere in the country, to just readily find these things but most cities have farmers markets, at least during certain times of the year. Also, we live in an age where things can be gotten online, and there are a lot of great places to get really good quality foods online. You know, there's CSAs, there are food cooperatives still out there. We have a number of them here in Portland.
I have to insert a disclaimer. No cat was actually hurt in the process.
Yeah. Look, I have a cat, and he's, you know, my life and my love. So, you know, I love cats. But anyway,
I'm a cat person too.
But I still have fun with, you know, my phrasing.
So going back to your book, what is the full title and the general concept of the book?
Even I have to kind of double check that. So it is Live Long. Well, the title of the book is Primal Fat Burner. The subtitle is.
Can you show it? Yeah.
Here we go. Can you read it for yourself there? Yeah. So live longer, slow aging, superpower your brain, and save your life with a high-fat, low-carb paleo diet.
Well, that's amazing.
And you know, this book, the original manuscript was that I attempted to hand in to the publisher was in excess of 300,000 words. And, you know, I think their eyes sort of bulged when they saw that, and they just said, you know, you've got to cut more than 2/3 of this. We cannot have that big a book. And I had over 3,000 peer-reviewed references. They're like, yeah, no, you can't do that either. We don't want this to look too science-y because it's a trade, you know, they want it to be a trade publication to go out and really reach the masses. And, you know, so it was an interesting back and forth. The book actually went through 4 different editors. The final one was amazing. I mean, I'm so happy with what we ultimately did to, you know, to consolidate there was a lot of amazing material that I literally wept over having to cut from the book because I knew it would save lives. And they just said, look, you know, that wasn't what we had as part of the original outline. You know, we don't have room for that, or are you going to, whatever. And there are 5 different chapters that got slashed. And they just said, you know, consolidate it into one. It's like, oh, you can't do this, you know.
There's another, yeah.
Go ahead.
We'll come back to that afterwards.
Oh, okay. All right. So anyway, but in spite of what I had to do to get this book in a publishable, you know, format or length, I guess, you know, it's incredibly good quality information, and it's incredibly information dense because, as we all here know, I tend to over deliver no matter what I do. It's just in my nature to want to just provide as much information as possible, and there's a lot. And it is very well supported evidence, even though, you know, we're down to 300 some odd peer-reviewed references as opposed to the previous 3,000. It's still a lot of support. And what you need to keep in mind is that I have 10 times the peer-reviewed support that actually landed in the book.
Maybe you can do like movie directors. Maybe you can publish
the director's cut
separately.
Yeah.
Maybe in digital form, so it wouldn't take so much.
Well, I think my publisher would not like if I attempted to rewrite the book in any way, because they own the rights to that. But that information is not. I mean, that's my information to do with as I please, and some of it is going to come out. Like there's a new article on my blog about relatively new article about Otzi the Iceman. You know. And basically what agriculture did for him, which was not good things. You know, this prehistoric human they found melting out of a glacier, you know, in Austria. That was originally a chapter in the book. And, you know, my editor said, this is amazing. This is great information. Why don't we allude to it and have people go to your blog to read about that? So that's, you know, I put it in there. There was a whole section of the book I originally wrote on, you know, debunking the myths of ketosis, all of the ways in which the misinformation and disinformation agents, both within the paleo genre and outside of it, that were looking to kind of scare people about, you know, adopting a fat-based diet, you know, ketogenic approach to things, low-carb approach to things. There was a lot of debunking that needed to happen, even though that wasn't part of the original book outline. And I was, you know, I fought to keep that in there, but we couldn't. So now basically when people go to my website and they and they, join the website to be able to get updates and things like that. I am not a spammer. I don't sell people's emails. I'm really, really mindful of that stuff. But it's shall we say, an ethical bribe. You sign up for my website, and I will give you a PDF of that chapter.
Right.
So or not. I can't technically call it a chapter because it wasn't. My publisher wouldn't like that, but it's bonus material, right?
Right.
That didn't make the book. And there's so much more that it's just sort of ridiculous. So some of it may end up being part of one of the other ways in which I've elected to disseminate some of this information that I believe is life-saving information, is through a program I've just created and launched that I call Primal Power 52. And 52 weeks in a year, blah, blah, blah. It's basically a weekly educational, informational program by subscription that gives people, number one, a foundational kind of education in their health and in how their diet affects that and how to understand all of this. I mean, for people who really want to build real health, they are not just looking for a quick fix or a pill to try to whatever, but they really want to get it. They want to take control of their health, and they want to, get more of what they've read in my previous books, and they want to go deeper, and they want to find out stuff that wasn't able to be published in the book. Then that's what this program is basically designed for. And it's an amazing amount of really quality information that I think has the power to transform a lot of lives. So a lot of this extra information is going to end up as part of that program, and other things, along the way. So it's not like it goes into the trash bin. No. But it's frustrating for me because my goal was to create the definitive book on the subject for all time, the reference book everybody was going to go back to forever. I mean, they said, Nora, build us a ship, and build us a boat, And so I built this, this gorgeous Viking ship with hand-carved woodwork and, and then silk sails that were hand-woven and all that kind of stuff. And then I went around with a caulking gun and I sealed all the cracks and all of the crevices and the seams so that this thing could weather any storm. Nothing could possibly sink it. And they looked at that and said, yeah, well, actually kind of what we had in mind was a rubber dinghy. And it's, and I've given birth to this beautiful baby that I'm so proud of. And they're like, yeah, the kid's a little too big. We really kind of need to start amputating. So like, here's an axe and a scalpel, go to it. And, I didn't have the heart to do it. So it's been through numerous incarnations to get to where it is. But the end result is actually quite a good one. And the fundamental premise, we might as well get to that, is that, dietary fat, I realized this a number of years ago. It gobsmacked me between the eyes in a way that it should have been obvious forever. And then when I finally started thinking about it, and suddenly all these dots just started connecting in my head like mad, I was gobsmacked with the realization that dietary fat, it's not just not as bad as we had once heard, or that, it's okay as long as we don't overdo it, or it's okay as long as it's olive oil and maybe a little coconut oil and, whatever. But I literally realized that dietary fat is not only central, including, in fact, especially dietary animal fat, not only central to human health, but it's quite literally central to what made us human in the first place. And then what we've been told to do over the last several decades is quite literally the opposite of what helps promote those things, of what keeps us healthy. And now we've recently discovered, and to my considerable chagrin, this stuff was kind of splayed all over the internet shortly after the book sort of was going to print and whatever else. It's like, dang, didn't make the book. But we know that now that the sugar industry, the New York Times uncovered this, was basically on, it was the sugar industry that was on a campaign, back in the 50s and whatever else, because all of the research that was coming out was starting to kind of show that actually it was, sugar was the thing that was responsible for these growing rates of heart disease and obesity. And they covered that up by basically, by paying off, researchers and industry, people in the medical industry and whatever else, to basically detract the attention away from them as the culprit, and instead point the finger at dietary fat as the culprit, and dietary animal fat as the culprit in heart disease and obesity. We know from mountains of research now that has come to light in recent years that that was not true. It was never true. But once you tell a lie loudly enough and long enough, it becomes part of the cultural zeitgeist. It becomes this sort of self-evident thing. Well, everybody knows saturated fat and cholesterol is bad for you. Right. Well, and few people bother to ask, where did that idea come from? Ansel Keys. Right. Let's talk about Ansel Keys. So, so the fact is that we've been bamboozled. Yeah. And we didn't. When we started, 1911, if you graduated medical school or in 1910 rather, you never heard of coronary thrombosis. That just wasn't in your lecture materials. And then in 1911, the first 4 cases of that were published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And, Dr. Paul Dudley White, who was personal physician to President Eisenhower, at the time, whatever. I mean, he was actually wrote the very first textbook on cardiovascular disease. Said, wow, what is this new thing that is happening to people? And he was fascinated by it and decided to devote his career to it. And his colleagues thought he was nuts. They're like, why would you devote your career to something so unprofitable? Your brilliant career, you're such a smart guy. And by the 1950s, this is the #1 cause of death. Did we all of a sudden start eating animal fat? I got news for you. I mean, the fat of a lot of these places in megafauna, I mean, the body fat, I mean, is 50%, in excess of 50% in some cases. And they moved pretty slowly. And we were smart enough, smarter than bears, wolves, and foxes and things like that. We'd eaten enough fat up to that point and valued it enough that we became smart enough to develop technology to be able to bring those animals down. And, when you have 4 inches of subcutaneous fat, under the hide of a woolly mammoth, and then you've got the brain and you've got the marrow and whatever else, we knew how to get at all of that. This is basically, what helped facilitate the incredible rate of encephalization of the human brain that is unprecedented in all of the natural world. There's no other species that has anything even close. And, supposedly our closest primate relative is the chimpanzee, which we're supposed to be vegan because chimps are, vegan, right? They're not. They all eat meat.
They do, yeah.
And hunt for it.
Yeah.
But just the same, what they're catching are small little animals for the most part, and they're just, they eat a little of the meat. The smaller the animal, oftentimes, the leaner the animal, the harder it is to catch, etc. And they are primarily a foraging, primate species. And they also have a gut that is much, much larger than ours. Human colon takes up maybe 20% of our digestive tract. In a chimp, it's about 52%. And it's a huge fermentation vat. You see these guts on in apes and chimps that makes them look like they drink beer all day. It's this huge colon. It's a fermentation vat that's designed to break down that plant material into something that they can actually use. And a chimp will get close to 60-70% of its calories actually from the saturated fats from the bacterial fermentation of those plant foods. But we don't have the capacity to create fat energy that way. For us, we have a hydrochloric acid-based digestive system. We are designed to get those fats directly from the animals that have synthesized the variety of these different fats for us. And our brain, our cognitive capacity, such as it is largely dependent on 2 particular fatty acids, 20 and 22 carbon chain fatty acids, arachidonic acid and docosahexaenoic acid, both of which are exclusively in our diet found in animal source foods. That's what makes our cognition unique. Primates, the primary, essential fatty acid in primate brain isn't an omega-3, it's an omega-6. It's designed very differently. And chimp's brain hasn't changed in terms of its size in the last 7 million years or so, where ours is more than tripled in a very, very, very short period of time. And then in the last 10,000 years, has started shrinking again.
Yes.
Once we developed agriculture.
I understand that in the old days, hunters would go first for the organs, the brain, the liver. What we consider to be good meat now was not, they would leave it to the animals.
They would leave it to their dogs, right?
Right, and they only ate the, fat-containing organs.
Right.
Because that's what was sustaining. Can you
I totally agree with you. Yeah. I mean, so what we also have to redefine what we call meat. If you're talking about steaks, you're talking about something really expensive for starters, but you're also talking about, relatively inferior nutrition to many of the organ meats. And, people, we've been kind of, we've lost our taste for those things, right?
Yes.
And I have to admit, I don't like liver. I do like poultry liver, and I love pate and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But you put a beef liver in front of me, and it's like, ugh, it's like taking castor oil or something. But there are lots of ways of getting these things in and sneaking them into your diet. You can take a regular grass-fed ground beef, and you can grind heart into it. You can grind liver into it. You can hide it in there in a way that you're not going to necessarily taste, but that you can benefit from. Right. The real nutrition in an animal, for the most part, is in the things that most people are accustomed to throwing away or just not buying.
Right.
And it can be reincorporated, and has to be, really, for our health, in ways that are entirely palatable. Very, very easy to consume. And hey, those things tend to be less expensive.
Yeah.
You don't have to go that far back. I mean, our grandparents in cookbooks in those days had plenty of good recipes using those organs. I mean, liver. I remember as a kid, my mom made us eat liver. It's a regular once a week kind of thing. Sautéed onions and kind of flavor it to make it a little more palatable. But just barely 2 generations ago, all these organs were eaten regularly.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you look at some of the sort of the more provincial French dishes, like deep fried brains and that sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah, it would be a great thing for people to be able to incorporate. I mean, this is what our ancestors did, and it's one of the reasons we developed the big brains we did.
Yeah. And the other thing, just to interject there, is if you look in sort of, I'll say the more exotic, the Eastern cultures and that sort of thing, they regularly eat the offal in preference to the meat.
Yeah. I watched this marvelous documentary from the 1960s. It was an Inuit family living on the land, and it showed them, hunting seal. And, the men, took the seal and they, pulled it out of the water, and they, cut into it and immediately removed the liver. And like the first thing they did was they took that huge liver and they hacked it up into, bite-sized pieces, and everybody just gorged on that raw liver. Right. First thing before they did anything else. Before they basically took apart the rest of the animal and brought it home. But what they feasted on was the most desirable part of it first, before they did anything else. And I think our ancestors intuitively understood, and even our great-grandparents intuitively understood, that this is where the real nutrition is in animal source foods. And it's not that meat doesn't have nutrition, regular muscle meat, but it's just nowhere near the benefit. And again, like the fat-soluble nutrients, that's the other thing in this book. It's not just fat as a source of energy, even though the title suggests that I'm just talking about a fat-based ketogenic approach to eating. But it's also, what has to be appreciated is the central role that fat-soluble nutrients of all kinds play in our health and in the expression of our DNA and in the functioning of our brains and immune systems and literally everything else. And, you know, people hear great things about vitamin D and how wonderful that is and how we should all be supplementing with it. Well, you know, vitamin D is found in our food supply in the fat of animals,
Right.
Usable vitamin D. You know, and fully pastured, for instance, pork is probably our richest natural dietary source of vitamin D that we can have. A pig that was allowed to live out in fresh air and sunshine, right?
Right.
Exposed to sunshine, much as we make vitamin D from sunlight, assuming that things are working right in our bodies and that we have enough cholesterol to start with, we can manufacture a certain amount of vitamin D from exposure. But, you know, pigs have more skin than fur, so similar to us, they synthesize a lot of vitamin D if they're allowed to live out in the sun. If they're living in confinement, then forget it. But
Right. I have a story for you, a little story there. A few years ago, I visited Ukraine for a month as part of a project that I was involved in. And I was surprised, even shocked, to see that one of their favorite treats is to take a piece of bread, put a thick slice of lard over it, sprinkle a little salt, and they just munch on that. That's
right.
a treat for them.
It's like the bread is the vehicle for the lard, right?
Right. And then so that made me question the whole concept of, because in France we do the same, but we do it with butter, you know, grass-fed, I mean, good quality butter. And it was like, wait a minute, so if fat is supposed to be so bad, why are these people literally surviving? And you said it yourself, Inuit live literally off of fat.
Right. I mean, it's you know, muktuk, which is just sort of foundational to their diet, is just these thick slabs of nothing but fat from the animals that they hunt. And you know, we think, okay, the Arctic, yeah, of course, you know, it's cold up there. Of course, they want to be, you know, well, they're not fat. They eat a lot of it, but they're not fat. They're lean people. And I guess a quick story on my part, when I, you know, and I think I might have talked about this the last time we were here, but I actually spent a whole summer of my life living less than 500 miles from the North Pole. Yeah. And I craved fat, and I would go to that weather station, and there was a huge bowl of butter in the mess hall. And I became obsessed with going and just, you know, I was still eating, you know, bread in those days, you know, that kind of crap, but it was a total vehicle for the butter. It was just something to slather this butter on. And I just ate as much as I could before I got too embarrassed to continue. And I lost 25 pounds that summer, you know. It's like, wow, really? So that was kind of a wake-up call. I'm scratching my head going, how do I make sense of this? And spending the time up there and realizing, you know, there's nothing growing that any human can eat here. There's permafrost. Yeah. So really all of the, you know, for the thousands of years that people actually lived here, 10,000 or so, that we know of, you know, these people were eating meat and fat diets. And, you know, clearly it was good enough for their health that they were able to thrive in this environment for as long as they did. And when humans, you know, when Europeans first came into contact with them, you know, just said, oh my gosh, this is, you know, well, Willem Stefansson certainly just said, like, these are the healthiest people I've ever seen in my life. But it's not just in places where it's cold. The amount of saturated fat consumed actually goes up the further south you go to the equator, because coconut becomes so central to those diets. Yeah. And there are less polyunsaturated fats actually in the diets of people living in more tropical and arid regions. In the arid outback, the Aboriginal people, they were obsessed with fat. That was the thing. And if they took down a kangaroo, and that kangaroo was too lean, they'd leave it out in the sun to rot and walk away from it until they could find something that was fat. Or emu, they're just an incredibly fatty bird, because they spent whole portions of, you know, their lives in sort of a torpor where they have to feed off their own fat reserves. And so there's a lot of concentrated nutrition in the fat of emus. And I talk about that in my book a little bit too. There's a company I like to, you know, promote that just produces an amazing quality emu oil that is a source of a huge range of just a full spectrum of fat soluble nutrients in their natural form, including CLA in its natural form and vitamin K2 in its natural animal source form. And, you know, I just take those capsules with me. I guess I don't have any in my space right now, but I usually keep them here, and I'll, like, you know, pop in these capsules here and there throughout the day, just to make sure I'm getting a synergistic complement of fat-soluble nutrients and fatty acids. And I travel with that too, so that, you know, like I traveled to Peru last year, and, you know, down there, it's all about the grains and the corn and the potatoes and the rice and whatever else. And so I was lugging along my own food in a lot of places, but I had those Zima oil capsules. I was, you know, made by Walkabout Health Products. They're great people. They raise their animals in the most natural possible way, and they have a unique genetic strain that seems to hyper-concentrate a lot of these nutrients in their fats. So it's great stuff.
So this is one of the good fats. What other healthy fat do you recommend for people listening to us?
Yeah, so, well, again, making sure that you maybe select for fattier cuts of entirely grass-fed and finished meat. And that you also, I'm a fan of cooking with animal fats, because it's much more stable and it adds a lot of flavor to the cooking.
Right.
I mean, coconut oil is fine, and there are some benefits to doing that, at least in the beginning stages, to help that transition from sugar burning to fat burning, because number one, these medium chain fats in coconut oil are more preferentially burned for energy, and you make, you know, you're more likely to make, your body makes ketones from some of these medium chain fats, although, you know, coconut oil isn't a huge source of ketones. It is compared, though, to a lot of other fats in the beginning. And then, but it's not as, in my mind, it's not as flavorful as some of the animal fats. My favorite thing to cook with is duck fat, but you know, and goose fat, and you know, all that.
It's coming back strongly.
It is coming back like big time.
Right, and
much to the chagrin of ducks everywhere, but it's so delicious, you know. But also, you know, pastured beef tallow and fully pastured lard and leaf lard, you know, and you know, chicken fat. And there's a company called Fatworks, and I like to plug them because this is a couple that is working very, very hard to do the right thing, to get these fats from 100% pastured sources, from small farmers working very hard to do the right thing. Right. And, you know, they have a product that costs a little more than a competing product from a multinational corporation, that it was predatorily designed their product around this product and is trying to squeeze them out of the marketplace. So I don't buy that product. I buy the one from Fatworks, because I know that they can verify what's in it. And really high quality, really delicious. And they have things like buffalo fat and wild boar fat, and just all kinds of really interesting animal fats that you can experiment, you know, cooking with.
I almost forget, there's a French street that's also very famous for its fat content, is foie gras.
Oh, yeah.
Which is, in its name, is fatty liver.
Foie
gras means fatty liver in French, so there's
it's pretty tasty stuff.
Right.
Like decadently tasty.
Of course, it's banned in some states in this country, right?
Well, it's just all about how it is produced, right? I mean, I mean, I think it makes sense to have some humane concerns, and I do, and you know, again, you know, we want to be supporting sustainability, and we want to support not just what's going to be healthiest for us, but what's going to be healthiest for the environment, you know, and to eat in a way that also has respect for the animal that gave its life for what we're consuming.
Actually, one of the best foie gras is produced by a Spaniard.
Really? Don't tell Alain that.
That's okay.
And them's fighting words, buddy.
They are, and he's taken it to France, and he's won sort of the golden medal for it. Again, much to the annoyance of the local French producers, to the point where when he went back and won it, I think for the second or third time, they started accusing him of bribing the judges.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do they ship overseas?
They do, yes.
Do they?
do.
Oh, well, email me
Yes.
like a link or something.
I will.
I'm sure
There's a couple of good videos that you can see online that show how he produces or grows and manages his flocks as well, and you can see he just lets them be geese.
Right,
Wow.
but unlike the French producers, he's only feeding them with what's the name of that? Like the pig like to eat too.
Acorns?
Acorns, yeah.
And so there's no corn, there's no soy, so it automatically the quality becomes a lot better, right?
Oh yeah. Okay.
But it's very limited quantity, I understand, and very expensive.
I know. You take out your foie gras alone. Yeah. Well, it is becoming increasingly expensive and for some people difficult to find real food produced in a quality way that can be trusted. And this has all sort of crept into the marketplace, over the last decades. And when I talk about being vigilant about all this and reading labels, and it's like, nothing with gluten, like ever, nothing, with agave syrup ever, or high fructose corn syrup, or canola oil or soybean oil or whatever else. I mean, I read labels and I'm going, oh God, putting stuff back on the shelves all the time. And, and it's easy to get tricked. I mean, I tricked from time to time. And then I get accused of, providing an extreme way of eating. Well, what's extreme isn't what I'm talking about. What's extreme is what we're forced to think of as food, what's being made available to us in the marketplace, and how that food is being treated, and and what we're just forced to accept as this is what's available. I mean, I go into conventional markets and I literally walk away saying, there is no food here. There is nothing. Nothing for me to eat.
No, I don't call it.
And the shelves are overflowing with crap, and people are throwing it in their carts, and you can see just looking at them visibly how it's affected their health. Oftentimes physical and even mental health, you can see it on their faces. So it's all a matter of what we prioritize. If you want to be healthy, you need to, food quality has to be your top priority, your top consideration. Every biochemical process that occurs in your body that is responsible for maintaining your health is dependent on the nutrients that you supply it with what you choose to eat. Exactly. All of it. Right. And so it's all about foundations. And fat is literally foundational. It's interesting. One of the things that was also telling for me, and I had to just smack myself, palm to the forehead when I first really looked at this and saw it in the right way. We're all familiar here with the work of Weston Price, and how he spent, 10 years and 100,000 miles traveling all over the world to study what primitive and traditional cultures were eating. And of course, the diets were extremely different. Every place he went where there were healthy people, in the tropics and in, the outback and in the jungles and in, the African savanna and wherever else that they went, the Celtic Islands, wherever, huge varieties of different kinds of foods, whatever. And so what people have kind of taken away from that is the idea that, see, there are lots of different ways to be healthy. It's just eat real food. Right. And I realized that, no, that's actually, it's not necessarily the takeaway message. Because what Weston Price also pointed out, there were just amidst this enormous variety of different things that people consumed. And again, the assumption people want to make is that, well, as long as it's natural, it's optimal for your health. There's no rational basis for that assumption. They all where people were extremely healthy. There was freedom from disease, and mental and physical health were extraordinary. There were two things that all of these cultures had in common. Number one, he couldn't find a vegetarian anywhere. He looked for vegetarians, vegans, he couldn't find them. And he was very disappointed about that. Every single one of these cultures ate as many animal source foods as were available to them. But the number two thing, and the thing that finally gobsmacked me was, and in every single instance of every culture that he studied, the one food that was always the most venerated, the most sought after, the one, given to pregnant women to have healthy babies, that was, absolutely prized more than anything else, was the food always that was the most fat and fat soluble, nutrient rich.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And then I'm looking at that and going, bingo. So what this tells me, these two principles tell me, is that this is the foundational part. And that, the one culture that, that kind of minimized the variables more than any other culture, and still had those two things in common, were the Inuit. Now, I'm not saying we all should eat like Inuit, but what I'm saying is that their diet represented, sort of the distilled down version of what was most foundational. And they enjoyed extraordinary health. He was extremely impressed with their health and well-being, and their dispositions. This is a culture that has never known war. This is a culture that has never known child abuse traditionally. And also the most carnivorous and fat-eating culture of all time. And so what that tells me is that these are our foundations, and everything else that we add to that is nuance, for better or worse. But if those foundations are solidly enough in place, this helps explain why traditional and primitive societies were able to kind of deal with these other variables that may not have been optimizing for their health. Yeah, so they ate a lot of potatoes, or sweet potatoes or whatever, but their other foundations were solidly enough in place, and their environment was pristine enough, and whatever else, that they were able to compensate,
Right.
Metabolically or however else, for whatever those other things were. So the way I saw it was, make sure that these first two foundations are in place. And this is foundational for all of us. There isn't a different book of anatomy and physiology for every person watching this.
Right.
It's not like, well, some people are better off as vegetarians and some people need more carbs and some people, no, that's not the way we're designed. What makes us human isn't our differences, it's what we have in common. And we have a hydrochloric acid-based digestive system that requires concentrated animal source foods in order to feed our physiological, makeup, and also our unusually big brains, which, by the way, just sort of keep shrinking, but oh well. And we have to have these things. And then ideally what we want to add to that is something that's not going to compromise it, because we're living in the most compromising, I think, period in our entire history as a species right now. We have a way more hostile environment to contend with in many respects than our ancestors did. And so many of the threats to our health and well-being, they don't have teeth and claws that are coming after us, or rocks falling on our heads or whatever else, or spears being thrown at us. A lot of these threats are invisible.
Yeah.
It's radiation, it's EMF pollution, it is pesticides and herbicides, and oh my God, rocket fuel in our water supplies, and it's GMOs, and it's fluoride, and I mean I could make a list that would get us all really depressed really quick. I can be a total buzzkill when I start listing these things off. And then on top of that, we have a genome that's been compromised now by not just 10,000 years of this agricultural experiment we adopted that was something we were just totally not designed to do. But we also have now the last, dozen or so generations of the Industrial Revolution that really set us on a slippery slope. Yeah. And now we're taking this stuff that we're not designed to eat and we're refining it down even more and throwing chemicals into it to try to make it tastier and more appealing and cheaper for the manufacturers, so that it's profitable for them and the medical industry and the pharmaceutical industry and the food companies and big agribusiness and big oil, whose biggest customer is big agribusiness. And even undertakers are making out like bandits. And the only people not profiting from this are those of us eating those foods. So it's taken its toll on our genome. We have a heavily compromised genome. It's the whole kind of Pottinger's cats thing, right? Yeah. What generation of Pottinger's cat are you? So taking that and then realizing that we don't have the wiggle room, not just of our ancestors, of our Paleolithic ancestors. We don't have the wiggle room of our great-grandparents, our grandparents, or even our parents anymore. And we have to, there's so many things that are impinging upon our health and well-being that we seemingly have no control over. But in the face of that, it's incumbent upon us to take control of what we can. And the best way we can do that is by what it is that we choose to eat and what it is that we choose to avoid. We still have some choices. And if we're smart enough and pay close attention enough to those details and make sure we're not compromising those details, we have a fighting chance to maintain some semblance of health in this modern world. And good luck to you. But
for our listeners, what would be your absolute number one advice to them related to the book?
Read it.
No, I mean, it sounds to me like the real truth about fat is the subject of your book. What is the real truth, and what would you like to share with the listener regarding what they should be doing?
Right. Well, I mean, the quality of the fat that you consume is going to be entirely relative to the quality or the health of the animal that fat and meat, whatever, came from. So not compromising on quality and understanding that we are designed as a species more than any other species to, in some respects, to eat a diet that is based in fat and also that fat from animal source foods. And it's not just fat, it's the fat soluble nutrients contained within them. We forget that we can't make use of those. And if we don't have fat soluble nutrients, good luck making use of any of the minerals in your diet. And if you're not producing hydrochloric acid in response to the consumption of complete and concentrated animal source foods, then you're not going to be able to ionize those minerals and absorb them. And without the fat soluble nutrients, you're not going to be able to utilize them. No. I mean, this is truly central to your health and well-being. And by the way, it's delicious, and it's also makes eating quite a bit more affordable because, fat in general tends to be a less expensive thing. And furthermore, it doesn't take a whole lot of fat to satisfy your appetite.
Right.
So in the end, you're going to be less hungry, eating less, far more satisfied, and it's really amazing and you'll save money. But it's also, even though we're leaving a lot of foods out of this, we're focused on, eliminating sugar and starch to the extent possible, moderating our protein intake to just what we need, eating as many fibrous vegetables and greens and cultured vegetables and, sprouts or whatever as you would like, to kind of add bulk and maybe get some extra, detoxification benefits and whatever else to your diet. And then eating as much fat as you feel like you need or want from a variety of animal sources and in a few plant sources, like olive oil and the real stuff, not the adulterated stuff, which is increasingly common. Avocado oil, coconut oil, these are fine. The first two better for putting in your salad dressings than cooking with. But get fats from a variety of sources that can meet your fatty acid and essential, fat soluble nutrient needs. There's some fat soluble nutrients that can only be gotten from animal source foods, like vitamin A, real vitamin A, retinol. Beta carotene is not vitamin A, not even close. It's provitamin A. It takes anywhere from 6 to 20 units of beta carotene to make a single unit of vitamin A under optimal circumstances and after childhood, because children can't do that. And then vitamin K2, which is, I think, the next rock star of the fat soluble nutrient sort of jamboree. Vitamin D has been a darling of the nutrition industry for a while now, and of writers, health writers. But you can't make use of vitamin D properly without, for one thing, some sufficient vitamin A. And as a matter of fact, for every molecule, for every receptor in every cell for vitamin D, there are 2 for vitamin A. So we have to have that. Best natural source, liver. And then vitamin K2 has to be there in concert with vitamin D3 and vitamin A, again, both of which are exclusive to animal source foods in their natural form. And K2 also can only be found in animal source foods, with the exception of a variety of K2 that's called an MK7 form of vitamin K2 that's found from fermented foods, like fermented krauts and things like that.
Yeah.
Assuming that the culture used was one that actually is made to synthesize that particular vitamin, and you can buy the cultures that do that. But there's the MK7 or MK4 form of vitamin K2 that can only be gotten from animal source foods, and it, if you want to avoid heart disease and you want to have healthy bones and a healthy immune system, you need that form of vitamin K, and it's probably the most deficient fat soluble nutrient around nowadays. So, we have to kind of, and again, you can only really be gotten in pastured animal fats, fully pastured animal fats. The feedlot stuff, good luck. You're not going to find it there. So, and then CLA, which it conjugated linoleic acid, or linolenic acid, it is the possibly one of the most anti-cancer foods out there, but it can only be gotten from the fat of animals that have been exclusively pasture-fed and finished. And emu oil contains a lot of it too. It's actually the only supplemental form of natural CLA available. All the other CLA that you see sold in the health food stores is synthetic and doesn't work. So all this stuff that just came so naturally. It sounds like there's a lot to think about, but if you're making your choices, making your food choices from the quality of the foods that I'm talking about, then a lot of this kind of naturally falls in place.
Yeah.
And you don't have to think it through, You just have to be vigilant about where you're getting your food from.
Right. So you did mention that there is a meal plan and recipes in this book. Can you tell us a little bit about it and how it would help your reader?
Well, so, Primal Body, Primal Mind, changed a lot of people's lives. And I got tons of mail from people that were just thrilled by the book. And I'm very proud of it. But I threw, a couple of recipes in there, but I just really didn't want to have to bother with a meal plan on it. I don't like telling people what to eat when, or, just eat this for breakfast, this for lunch, this for dinner. It's like, give them the principles, let them choose, from the variety of foods available, how they want to put that together. But there were a lot of people that felt a little lost. They read it and their eyes glazed over and they said, well, what do I eat? And it seemed self-evident to me, but I was the author. So, and so what this book does more so is it handholds the reader through the process of adopting this way of eating. And it's not carved in stone. It gives people guidelines and it gives them some really wonderful recipes I guarantee you're going to like. And it makes that way of eating a lot more accessible, and it just sort of gives you a template. It gives you, the guidance to be able to do this, in a way that a lot of my previous writing hasn't really provided. So I've been getting a lot of great feedback now. I mean, it's amazing. The book's only been out like a month, and I'm getting almost, in fact, exactly a month as of tomorrow. And I've just been getting floods of, gosh, I've already lost 15 pounds or whatever. I mean, it's like they're loving the recipes, and people are in love with this book in a way. I have no objectivity about it anymore. I've been through it so many times, and it's been through so many incarnations. I don't know what's in there or not anymore. It's like, right. I don't know if it's any good even, because, as a writer, and, Alain, you appreciate this.
Yeah.
After you've read through what you've written, even a couple, 3 times, you don't see it anymore, much less, 50 times or 100 times, whatever that you're asked to do with a publisher. And so it's like, I don't know, I'm hoping this is good. I'm hoping people like it and that it helps them. And overwhelmingly, the feedback has just been amazing. It's already got basically 55-star reviews on Amazon, which I'm just blown away by. No, I did not pay my friends to go and do this. There were a number of people who, I had a book release event in Portland, and one of the things and it was just an amazing event. And I had Alan Savory and Dave Perlmutter made cameos, and but I gave away copies, hardcover copies of my book to everybody that attended, the event. And so some of the reviews are from people who attended the event, who've had a chance to read it and digest it, so to speak. But
was it grass-fed?
Yeah, everything. I mean, all of the food at this event was absolutely 100%. I mean, I worked with a wonderful award-winning chef who I just adore, one of the nicest people I've ever met, and one of the most talented people. And he, at every turn, was calling me up and saying, well, is it okay if we put dates in this, or if we have this, or a little bit of that, or whatever? And I'm like, yeah, no, it's not okay. We've got to figure something else out. Right. I created this recipe. There's a little tapioca flour. Is that okay? No, we can't do that. So I wanted to make sure that whoever came would be able to eat what was there and not have to worry about whether there was something contaminating the food or right. Whatever. I'm
a little jealous you didn't call me.
Well, the guy that I hired for this lives down the road here, and we had to work together very closely. I promise I'll call you the next time. I actually could see doing another event like that, because it was so cool. I mean, it was such a first class event, and so it was drop dead gorgeous. The whole thing was beautiful. Yeah.
Good for you, Mark. Your turn.
Well, actually,
you're invited next time too, Mark.
Thank you very much. I look forward to that, actually. Well, I'm supposed to be trying to get over for one of these Paleo FX dues, one year or the other.
You got to do it.
Yeah, I've just got such a tight schedule at the moment. It's one of those things.
Excuses.
I know.
Yeah.
I want to come back on food quality, really. Simply because it does seem to be a subject that most people don't understand. They don't understand the difference between, how can I put that, actual quality of food and the price they pay.
Right. Well, you get what you pay for. Although you don't have to pay, exorbitant prices for quality food if you know how to look at it the right way and how to shop for it in the right way. I mean, I do want to encourage people, just give my friend a plug, because she created such a great book for this, Primal Tightwad. And you just go to primaltightwad.com, and it's there. It's an ebook format. It's not in any kind of hard copy. Again, she's thrifty. She didn't want to spend all the money on producing a hard copy. And, the website's really colorful too. You'll see her dressed like Raquel Welch in that movie,
I think we'll have to invite her on, Alan, don't you?
Yeah. You probably should. She's great. She's funny. She's witty, and she's very, very smart. But anyway, Primal Tightwad is, it gives a lot of, kind of like beyond common sense, actually, advice. I mean, when I asked her to write this, she's like, well, everybody knows this stuff, don't they? And I'm like, no, they really don't. They think if they want good food, they have to go to Whole Foods to buy it, or, some really expensive specialty market or something in order to buy it. And that's just not true. Lots of ways of going about these things. It's one of the things too, another place I kind of want to plug, just, because I just want to, is one of the people that attended my event was somebody who runs a farm called Heart to Heart Farms. His name's Tyler Boggs. And he created this whole model for his form of doing things that actually makes the best quality food money can buy totally affordable to families that would otherwise be on food stamps. And how he does it is this. Say, a family otherwise on food stamps shows up at his doorstep and said, I'm aware of the value of quality food, and I want to be able to feed my family with quality grass-fed meat, whatever, but I can't afford some of the prices that I see. and Tyler's like, yeah, no problem. What can you do? Based on what a person's skill set might be. And maybe it's just, hauling stuff around the farm or whatever for a couple of days, doing some work around the farm. And he has a variety of things that people can do. 2 days later, this person goes home with an enormous box of the best quality food money can buy. And it didn't cost them anything except for a little time and elbow grease. And he's fed countless families here in the Portland area with that philosophy, and has really high quality food. The other thing that he's been able to do is raise a more quality organic fresh produce for families in need at no cost to them, I might add. Like over 500,000 pounds, I believe, last year, which was more than the Oregon Food Bank actually raised, and was able to give it to these families in many cases at no charge to them. And he's figured out how to do this stuff, and he has a model for doing. I would like to see a lot more farms adopting this model. For people that can afford it, charge a certain price, but for those who can't, give them another way of going about this, so that those places that are pandering to the interest of multinational corporations, don't have a corner on the market, so to speak. No. That let's give our money and get our foods from people that are working very hard to do the right thing, who are passionate about doing the right thing. And not only is this better for your health, it's also, it turns out, a hell of a lot more sustainable for the planet. And if we believe Alain's savory, which I do, this is also the one shot we have at saving the world we live in. Nothing has ever been more destructive to the planet than the development of agriculture. Nothing has ever been a more destructive force, or a more destructive force to the health of humans.
No, that's very true.
It's not what is sustainable going forward. Vegetarians and vegans who are so well-meaning and so passionate about these ideals, have been bamboozled into believing the opposite of what is actually true.
Yeah.
The grasslands that help stabilize our climate and keep nutrients in the soils and keep healthy watersheds going. These grasslands co-evolved with the animals that thundered across them. At least 120 species more before the end of the last ice age. We're talking about, blackening numbers of animals, tens of millions of animals thundering across landscapes that were as healthy as could be. The landscapes themselves, the environment. And these animals and these grasslands co-evolved. And if you take those animals off the grasslands die.
Yeah.
How we regenerate the planet is not by, taking a patch of ground, removing every living thing from it, right down to the microbes in the soil, dumping a bunch of fertilizer on it and growing monocrops, or even just, a few varieties of plant foods. And people need to realize less than 5% of what we actually call agriculture amounts to growing vegetables.
Yeah.
Most of it's monocrops,
yeah.
and, industrial plants for various things. And it's destroying everything. It's destroying everything that we hold dear. The idea is to put the animals back on the land and restore natural systems. And you can rotate those things, as Alain, you were talking about the farm that you went to. The farms that are doing it right, they're rotating these things. And you can grow crops on these rotated farm systems where the animals are rotated off, and you can move crops in. You're going to get higher yields from the crops that you do grow. And they're going to be much more nutritious. And so if we want to restore the health of the soil, restore healthy watersheds that are disappearing, more than 2/3 of the planet now has fallen to desertification because of the loss of grasslands. And what's happening is that grasslands are being replaced by corn and other monocrops now. And where the opposite should be happening, we should be reverting these things back to grasslands again, and then putting the animals back on it. And those animals that are being properly fed by what's natural for them to consume in the right way, when done the right way, is not only restoring natural systems and healthy watersheds and stabilizing climate issues, where all this is happening. But there also has the potential to feed vast human populations with nutritionally superior, nutrient-dense food in a way that also helps stabilize, social and political unrest in places in the world where, there are places in Northern Africa and Southern Asia where only animal source foods really can be feeding these populations because nothing can grow there, except for grasses and sedges and shrubs that the animals can consume, and then we can consume those animals. But otherwise, there are lots of places where agriculture, in fact, most of the land mass on planet Earth is totally unsuitable for agriculture. But there are all kinds of things to eat in those places that by animals that can later serve as quality nourishment for us. And we just have to change the way we think to make this happen. And that's part of what I tried to create with Primal Fat Burner, was a paradigm shift in the way we think about all of this. It's a big picture book. It's not just eat this and don't eat that to feel better. It goes way beyond that. And I'm hoping that people recognize that this is a movement. It's about becoming part of a movement that we all have to kind of band together in order to make this happen.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think that's probably, because I'm conscious of your time, I think that's probably a good place to come back to your book. Can you share it to us again?
Yes, it's Primal Fat Burner. It's available in probably every bookstore. I know it's even available in like airport bookstores and things like that now.
You can hold it up so we can all see it?
Yes, absolutely.
You can never have too much publicity for a brilliant book.
No, you can never do that. And also want to encourage people to check out Primal Power 52, primalpower52.com, as a way of really getting a systematic education about all this in a way that you can use then to just understand instinctively what it is you need to do, where you're not having to kind of constantly go and say, what was that again? You just sort of know.
And it's available in all good bookshops and
all the good bookshops, online
Amazon.
Things. It's available in all of the ebook formats. It's even available as an audiobook. I did not do the audio part of it, but I at any rate, I've been getting very good feedback on all of these on all of this, and I really sincerely hope your viewers avail themselves of the book, and if they like it, especially if they like it, I hope they go to Amazon and say something about that.
Absolutely.
The idea is to bring this to the attention of, ideally the New York Times, best-selling lists and things like that, to make this message. It's not about me. I swear to you. It's about making this message mainstream. That's what has to happen for the grassroots to actually grow up and actually choke out the weeds that are choking us out.
That's very true. Yeah.
Thank you again, Nora, for being on the Low Carb Paleo Show, and sincerely hope to see you at the Paleo FX 2017 coming up in Austin.
Yeah, wouldn't miss it.
And like we say in Texas, à votre santé, yo.
Okay.
Say that all the time in Texas.
Do they really?
Yeah.
Apparently.
They'll say, but they're crazy, but you'll like them anyway.